everyone, welcome to the very first, what do we call this? Webinar? Pod chat? I think we went with pod chat last time. Anyways, okay, so this presentation is about the Scylighter Schema, part one, stories. So this is how I analyze stories. We're splitting this into two parts. We're starting with fiction, and then we're going to do nonfiction a few weeks from now. But the reason why we're doing this is because I wanted to give you a kind of idea into this is how I assess books, this is how I think about books. And then when I do book reviews and tear them apart and stuff like that, and not just tear them apart, analyze them to find the jewels that we can then apply to our own writing, then it'll make a little bit more sense. So, as you can see, this is based on an article which is currently published in Medium. It's called How to Analyze and Write Unforgettable Stories That Change People's Lives for Good. It goes into a lot more detail, but we're just basically going to do the audio summary version of it right here, right now. So, beginning with, why are we analyzing stories? Because a lot of times people consume stories without really thinking very hard about it, which is fine. It's like, you don't have to think hard about the food you eat. But stories are a little different because they can work for you or against you. And then an added layer on top of that is as writers, we want to learn how the best writers write the best stories so that we can incorporate those elements into our own writing. Because if you're going to write, might as well do a good job, right? Might as well tell a story worth hearing or worth reading. So the way that I look at stories is through the lens of three concentric rings, or three circles, however you want to put it. It's kind of like human beings. We have three parts as well. We've got our body, we've got our soul, and we've got our spirit. So the body obviously is the physical side. It's the most visible. It's the most easy to manipulate, or not manipulate, but like touch and interact with. Then there's the soul, which is like our mental, emotional side, right? And then there's the spirit, which is a little mysterious. And people have different opinions about what that is. I have my own. You have yours, probably. But anyways, so stories are like that as well. They have the craft, which is the outer layer, and then there's the concept, which is the middle layer, and then there's the core, which is the inner layer. So we're going to go from inside out, like the movie. And we'll talk about each one of these layers in turn. I'll give you some examples. Let's do it. First, we start with the core, which is like the spirit of the book. And as an example of this, I chose Les Miserables. So Les Miserables, real quick, is the story of, despite the picture of this poor little girl that you see on the cover, it's really not her story. It's the story of the man who adopts her. His name is Jean Valjean, and he gets wrongly accused, well, rightly accused of theft, but he did it because he was starving, or his family was starving. And he gets thrown into jail for something like 20 years, and he comes out and he's a bitter, angry man who thinks that, life sucks and people are horrible. But on his first day out on parole, he runs into a kindly bishop who not only gives him a place to stay, but after Jean Valjean steals from him, the bishop forgives him, lets him keep the stuff he stole, and then says, I want you to take the silver that the silver that I, quote, gave you, and use it to become an honest man. And this completely changes Jean Valjean's life around. And this whole thing is set during 1800s, I think. There's a lot of political tensions and crazy stuff going on. So it's a really big, long, epic story. But the main thread through it is Jean Valjean's story. And the reason why there's this little girl on the cover is because at some point he adopts her because her mother dies. Her mother is one of the like lower class factory workers who got taken advantage of by a man who didn't take responsibility for her, and then or their daughter. And then so Jean Valjean, the main character, adopts her and he raises her as his own. And in the end, it's like all of the suffering and hard work and stuff that he went through was in order to give her a better life than he was able to have. Anyways, so the core of that story, it's basically the worldview. It's the way that the author sees life and this world and good and evil, right and wrong, and what makes life worth living, what human nature is, things like that. And some of the things that you get from reading Les Miserables is the concept that even though the world can sometimes be awful and there's a lot of suffering that goes on and sometimes people deserve it and sometimes they don't, and it's just a kind of a confusing mess and there's a lot of darkness going on, but at the same time there is still goodness that exists, and that's worth fighting for, that's worth striving for. Another major concept or worldview that the story portrays is the idea that it is kindness that leads people to repentance. There's actually a Bible verse, I forgot the exact reference. Oh, Romans, that says God's kindness leads us to repentance. And this is the reason why, when somebody's wrong and you try to get them to, quote, see the light, it doesn't really help to yell at them or bash them. That almost always fails. It's when you show kindness undeservedly and that person has a conscience and they realize that they're in the wrong, that really turns them around. Granted, there are exceptions. But anyways, that's one of the worldview lessons that you learn. And then there's also the idea that selfless love can do a lot of good. So Jean Valjean, he after his encounter with this kindly bishop, he turns his entire life around and he starts helping people and doing good towards others and being kind to them, loving them, sacrificing himself on their behalf. And there's a lot of struggle and turmoil throughout the whole story, lots of conflict, but in the end, you know that he did the right thing. And so on and so forth. There's a lot more to that. The core is really hard to put into words sometimes because worldview is kind of like the water that you swim in if you're a fish, right? You don't notice a lot of times what you believe until something happens. And this is one of the reasons why sometimes you'll find people will be praising a book up the wazoo or a movie and you're like, yeah, it doesn't really resonate with me. I don't really like it. I mean, technically it's fine. There's really nothing wrong with it exactly. Can't really put my finger on it, but there's something about it I don't like. It gives me a feeling that doesn't resonate. On the flip side, you can also find books or movies that are perhaps they're not very well done, they're kind of cliche, they're simplistic, but something about it resonates with you. And oftentimes that's because of the worldview, the core, the heart of this book or story, as the case may be. All right, so the second layer is the concept or the soul. I call it concept just, to keep that alliterative C thing going. But you can also call this the premise, the hook, the structure, the underlying structure, genre, whatever. It's basically it's what kind of creates certain expectations in the reader. And for example, here are three movies, and they all have the same concept, which is that the main characters are stuck in a time loop, or the main character, as the case may be. And in Groundhog Day, the main character, he is a newscaster, and then he wakes up day after day on the same day, and he tries to kill himself, but he'll just wake up again. And he is a self-centered snob who has a crush on this girl that you see on the corner here, and he can't get her attention because he's really self-centered. And over the course of the movie, he learns to change his ways and become more selfless, and eventually gets the girl and ends the time loop. Happy Death Day is a dark comedy about a girl who keeps getting murdered, and she keeps waking up and trying to figure out who's murdering her and why. And then the map of tiny perfect things is about a boy who's stuck in a time loop and he doesn't know why, and then he bumps into a girl who appears to be stuck in the same time loop, and they figure out, or they decide that maybe the way to break the time loop is to find all of the little, quote, perfect things that happen in a day and map it out and see if there are any patterns, and then so on and so forth. But for all of these three movies, the core concept is that somebody's stuck in a time loop, and it requires some kind of change in their character in order to break the time loop. So there are some expectations that come along with this concept. For one, we expect that the main character has to start deficient in some way, like there's something wrong with their character. Usually it's that they're too selfish and self-centered. And then over time, they learn to stop thinking just of themselves, and they get to care more about others and change their character. Another thing that you will expect is that the overall tone of the show is a little bit lighthearted and fun. Even the one in the middle, Happy Death Day, it's like murder mystery and somebody gets killed all the time, but it's still lighthearted. There's still moments of levity and jokes and things like that. There must be a lot of hijinks and fun times, and also the character must have another, usually romantic interest, who helps them in their quest to break the time loop. So those are expectations that people want to see when a certain concept comes up. So a concept can be kind of timeless or familiar, like enemies to lovers. We see that in Pride and Prejudice. We see that in Romeo and Juliet, sort of, and other places. To some degree, Hunger Games as well, at least from Katniss's side. But the idea is that the concept is kind of like a framework. It sets up expectations, and whether you fulfill those expectations or subvert them in a clever way, that is what determines how well your story is received. Okay, then we get to the outer layer, the third part. Oh, hold on, not yet. One thing, the LMA system. So one thing that I have discovered when I'm going through reading stories and things like that is that they almost always fall into one of three categories, or generally speaking, they feature one category pretty strongly, and then the other two are often included as well, sometimes in subplots or whatever, to add richness, but they tend to be primarily one. You can categorize just about every story in the world under one of these three things, and those three are love, mystery, and adventure. Now, love doesn't always mean romance, though. It can be romance, but it generally means just that somebody is willing to put the ultimate good of somebody else ahead of their own, or they learn to do that over the course of the story. And so the love can be platonic, fraternal, filial, societal. It can be between two people, or it can be like one person to a society, like one person is willing to give himself up to save the whole world kind of thing. A lot of superhero stories are like that. And then the purpose of a love story, because all of these stories in general have purposes for us, and it's not just to distract us from life or stress, it's also to help us grow and to teach us life lessons that are actually useful to us. And so the purpose of a love story, whether it's romantic or not, is to help you learn to get along better with the people in your life. So be that, take that as it is. All right, the next one is mysteries. So mysteries are primarily about solving a puzzle, finding the answer to a problem, resolving unfinished business, bringing to light something that was hidden. And so you have your traditional mysteries like Nancy Drew, Sherlock Holmes, etc. But there are also unconventional mysteries. For example, Harry Potter is primarily a mystery, and every single book in it. Well, there's a lot of adventure in there too, so you can kind of make a case. But especially, say, Chamber of Secrets, that's a huge mystery. And The Great Gatsby, to some degree, is a mystery. 1984, to some degree, because you're kind of like, what is going on with this crazy society? And so mysteries are not necessarily just those that are, cozy mysteries or somebody's died or whatever. What is the purpose of a mystery? They help you to see and understand something that you previously were unable or unwilling to see, and they kind of give you a sense of a mental boost about your own mental acuity, mental faculties, makes you feel a little clever because you either discovered the mystery alongside the detective, or after they explain the mystery, you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's really clever. Then we've got adventure over here, represented by this really cute bear with a backpack. And adventure is about discovery, about having fun most of the time, but not always. There can be adventures that are pretty dark, like dystopians. It's about finding something exciting, traveling somewhere new, growing, think quests, fights, journeys, etc. And examples of these would be, Lord of the Rings, Alice in Wonderland, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then there are survival stories like Robinson Crusoe, Treasure Island. They're growing up stories. So growing up, even if you don't actually go anywhere physically, growing up is an adventure. So Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, Picture of Dorian Gray to some degree, Pilgrim's Progress. Then there are stories that kind of reveal something like dystopian. So there's Animal Farm, Brave New World. Then there's Count of Monte Cristo, which is also kind of an adventure because there's no mystery there. You can argue there's some love stories in there as well, but I would say it's primarily an adventure story. So the purpose of the adventure story is to teach you a little bit more about your world, physical and or metaphysical, and show you a little bit about how to navigate it, either literally, practically, or kind of mentally, metaphysically. And it also can give you some kind of inspiration because we're all a little bit afraid of the unknown. And so when you read an adventure story, it can kind of give you some courage and motivation to go and pursue your own adventure. And great adventures also elicit a sense of awe and wonder. So that tends to go away as, when you're a little kid, everything inspires awe. Everything is amazing. And then as you grow older, you get a little bit more cynical. You stop paying attention to things. Adventures can help you to pay attention once again to the world around you and be like, wow, this is really interesting. I never even noticed that there's a lot of fun stuff in my neighborhood or whatever. Okay, so that's level 2. Let's go on to level 3, which is the outer surface layer, which is craft. And this is the part that is this is execution. How well does the story, how well does the writer execute the story? These are all the surface features that most people think about when they first start to think about analyzing stories. So it's like, so how did the characterization work? And how was the plotting? And if it's a fantasy, is the magic system cool and elaborate? Sorry. If they made up their own languages, how does that work? Does that fit? Tolkien made up his own language. He did a lot of world building, that kind of thing. That a lot of people think that's really deep. It's actually not. This is the surface level of the story. Like I said, the heart of the story is the worldview, and that is what changes you on the deepest level. We've got the concept, and then now we've got the craft. So an example of this craft idea is that like James Cameron's Avatar series, they're pretty flimsy on levels 1 and 2, but he is a genius at technology. So when you look at the movie, it's just really mind-blowingly visually appealing. And then another example of this is Andy Weir's The Martian, which is a fairly simple, straightforward adventure story. Nothing super standout about it, but the execution of it is so good because his character, Mark Watney, has an amazing, hilarious narrative voice. So that's that. All right, so let's talk about how to use these concentric rings of storytelling to understand and assess stories. First, you consider the core message, the inner circle. Oh, so this is an example of the craft, by the way. And then, yeah, so you start with the core and you're thinking, okay, what is this story trying to say? What is the author's beliefs? What is he or she trying to persuade me to see that I didn't see before? Or like, do I resonate with them or not? And is that good or bad or right or wrong? Or like, how is the story changing the way I see the world? You know, that's something to consider. And then also you can kind of consider internal consistency. So if they have a certain worldview, does it conflict with itself or does it resonate with objective reality? Then we've got, and does this story inspire and motivate, or does it kind of create a sense of depression and cynicism, or you know, like what kind of feelings does it evoke for you? Then you can look at the second level and the third level. Kind of they go together pretty closely. The second level is like, what is the overall concept, premise, or hook of the story, and what promises are being made by the author, and how does that affect the readers? What do the readers expect to see? And based on that, the craft is how well is this executed? Are the promises fulfilled? Is the story well done, written well? The characterization, the plotting, the features, are they all there? How does the writer use words? How do they build characters, worlds, set up plot twists, etc.? So that's basically the three circle method of looking at the different functions of a story. But aside from that, this I also have something I call the 4 H's. This is more personal to me. It's not as universal, I would say, but these are the 4 elements that I look for in any story that I love. The first one, humor, is not 100% necessary, but I do really like stories that have humor, which is one of the reasons why I gravitate towards like satires, middle grade fiction. A lot of those are funny and things like that. But you know, doesn't have to. But when there's humor, when there's a sort of lightheartedness to it, I do appreciate books that have that. Then we've got heart, and for me, heart is something that quote warms the cockles of your heart. So the books remind you of goodness in life, and they're just encouraging. It's kind of like warm soup on a cold day kind of books. I like those. Or they can be kind of dark, even gritty, even like stressful, but at the core, there's a sense of now we're moving into hope, which is this one. And I don't mind when stories are dark, but I don't like it when they're nihilistic. So to some degree, this is one of the reasons why I hated the book Frankenstein. I read it 2 or 3 times for school, hated it. Like every time the reading just got worse. Because there's nothing redeeming about the story. The whole thing is just like, wow, everything sucks. The world sucks. People suck. Everything needs to go and die kind of thing. And no, I don't like those kinds of stories. Then we've got, whoops, then we've got history. And I use this word in a couple ways. So the first one is that the world or the setting is well developed, or there's a lot of internal consistency. The person who wrote the story spent a lot of time thinking about the history of the story, the history of the setting before they created this book. And the best example of this is probably Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien. Harry Potter does this as well. A lot of the fantasy people do this, but you can also do this in non-fantasy, like Lynn Austen, Chronicles of the Kings. So she does a lot of study into the actual history combined with her own imagination to create a very 3D fleshed out realistic world for her stories. Next, moving on to our star ratings. So if you have seen any of my book reviews, I usually rate everything on a scale of 5, but the 6th star is basically this book belongs on my top 100s list. And that was basically given, this idea came from one of my favorite living authors, award-winning living authors, Lynn Austin. And she basically said that if you want to be a writer, you should take a list of your 100 favorite books, and then for each one, ask yourself, why do I like this book? What is it about the story that resonates with me? And so I decided to make a list of my 100 favorites, and they are seriously favorites, not just I kind of like this, but I'm trying to set the bar really high. So that's why there's a 6th star, but usually it's just 5. So 1 star means don't bother. 2 stars means read it if you want, but it's not that great. 3rd star means it's pretty interesting. 3 stars, I mean, read if you enjoyed the topic. 4 stars means it's a solid book. I recommend it. And then 5 stars is this is the best of its kind, worth rereading, highly recommend it. Well, this is highly recommend. This is like super highly recommend. So there you have it. That is the Scylighter schema for analyzing stories. And if you aren't yet in our Merry Band, which is what we call our email list, feel free to join us at be@brilliantwriter.com. You're going to get a free checklist and a few other goodies, and you get to be the first to be notified when we have book reviews and fun things like that going on. Other than that, thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure, and I will see you guys in the next video.